The words echoed through the great hall like a death sentence. I, Demon Cross, reject you, Alara Vane, as my mate and Luna. Alara stood frozen at the center of the ballroom, hundreds of eyes burning into her skin. The rejection ceremony had drawn every noble wolf in the territory, all of them here to witness her humiliation. She could feel their pity, their disgust, their relief that it wasn't them standing in her place. The golden chandeliers above seemed too bright, the music that had been playing moments ago now silent. Everything had stopped. Everything except the pounding of her heart and the shattering of her soul. Demon stood before her in his finest black suit, his handsome face twisted with barely concealed contempt. She had loved that face once. She had traced those sharp cheekbones with her fingers, had kissed those lips and believed every lie they told her. 3 years. 3 years of being his secret, his shame, his dirty little Omega that he kept hidden from polite society. And now, on the night he was supposed to finally claim her publicly, he had chosen to destroy her instead. She is barren, Demon announced to the crowd, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. The healers have confirmed it. She cannot produce heirs, and I will not bind my bloodline to a defective wolf. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Alara felt the words hit her like a physical blow, and she stumbled back a step. Barren. Defective. The terms she had feared her whole life, now spoken aloud for everyone to hear. Her wolf whimpered inside her chest, curling into a tight ball of agony. Demon, please, she whispered, hating the weakness in her voice. We can talk about this privately. There are other ways. There is nothing to discuss. He turned away from her as if she were nothing, as if 3 years meant nothing, as if the bond that still pulsed between them was something he could simply discard. Guards, escort her from the premises. She is no longer welcome in Cross territory. The rejection burned through her veins like poison. Alara gasped as the mate bond began to tear, the sacred connection that had once filled her with warmth now ripping itself apart inside her chest. She dropped to her knees, unable to stand against the pain. Tears streamed down her face, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. What was the point? Everyone had already seen her at her lowest. 2 guards approached, their expressions apologetic but their grips firm as they hauled her to her feet. The crowd parted to let them through, nobles stepping back as if her shame were contagious. Alara caught glimpses of their faces, some pitying, some amused, some already whispering behind their fans about the barren Omega who had dared to dream above her station. Then the great doors of the ballroom burst open. A wave of power rolled through the hall, so intense that every wolf present dropped to their knees in instinctive submission. Even the guards holding Alara released her and bowed their heads. The chandeliers flickered. The air grew thick with the scent of pine and winter storms, wild and ancient and overwhelming. Alara looked up, her tear-stained face lifting toward the entrance. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black military coat that bore the crimson crest of the royal house. His dark hair was swept back from a face that looked carved from stone, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, eyes the color of molten gold. Those eyes swept across the ballroom with cold authority before landing on her and stopping. The man, no, the Alpha King himself, inhaled sharply. His golden eyes flared bright, almost glowing, and something shifted in his expression. The cold authority cracked, replaced by something raw and hungry and utterly focused on her. Mate, he growled, the word resonating through the silent hall like thunder. Alara's broken heart stuttered in her chest. The torn bond that Demon had just shattered seemed to pause mid-destruction, as if waiting. And beneath the pain, beneath the humiliation, she felt something new stir to life. A second bond, stronger, deeper, pulling her toward the most powerful wolf in the kingdom. The Alpha King took a step forward, and the entire room held its breath. Your Majesty. Demon's voice cracked as he scrambled to his feet and dropped into a deep bow. We were not expecting your presence at our humble gathering. If I had known. Silence. The single word cut through the air like a blade. The Alpha King did not even glance at Demon. His golden eyes remained fixed on Alara, burning with an intensity that made her skin prickle with heat. He moved through the crowd with the easy grace of a predator, wolves parting before him like water around a stone. Each step brought him closer, and each step made the new bond in Alara's chest pulse stronger. She should stand. She should bow. She should do something other than kneel on the cold marble floor with tears drying on her cheeks and her heart in pieces. But her body refused to obey her, too overwhelmed by the impossible thing that was happening. The Alpha King stopped directly in front of her. Up close, he was even more imposing, a wall of muscle and power that seemed to fill her entire vision. A thin scar ran along his jaw, and his eyes held shadows that spoke of battles and burdens she could not begin to imagine. He was not handsome in the soft way that Demon was. He was something harder, something dangerous. And he was looking at her like she was the only person in the room. What is your name? His voice was deep and rough, as if he did not use it often for gentle conversation. Alara. The word came out as barely a whisper. She swallowed and tried again. Alara Vane, Your Majesty. Something flickered in those golden eyes. Ilara, he repeated, and her name sounded different on his tongue. Precious, important. Why are you on the floor? Before she could answer, Demon stepped forward with a nervous laugh. Your Majesty, there has been a misunderstanding. This woman she was my intended, but I have just rejected her. She is barren, you see, unable to produce heirs. Surely you do not want to concern yourself with damaged goods. The temperature in the room dropped. The Alpha King turned his head slowly, and for the first time, he looked at Demon Cross. The weight of that gaze made Demon stumble backward, his face draining of color. Alara watched as the man who had just humiliated her in front of hundreds suddenly looked very small and very afraid. You rejected her, the Alpha King said. It was not a question. Yes, Your Majesty, for the good of my bloodline. She cannot. You rejected my mate. The words landed like a hammer blow. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Demon's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Alara felt her own shock mirror the room's. The Alpha King had just claimed her publicly, in front of every noble wolf in the territory. There was no taking that back. There was no pretending it had not happened. She is nothing, Demon finally managed, though his voice shook. A weak Omega from a disgraced family. Her parents died in debt, and she has no standing, no connections, no— She is mine. The Alpha King reached down and took Alara's hand. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip firm but careful as he helped her to her feet. She rose on trembling legs, acutely aware of how she must look, tear-stained, disheveled, wearing a simple blue gown that suddenly seemed shabby compared to the glittering nobles around her. But the Alpha King did not seem to notice or care. He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm as if she were the finest lady in the kingdom. My name is Cale Blackwood, he said quietly, for her ears alone, and you will never kneel before anyone again. Alara stared up at him, unable to form words. This had to be a dream, a hallucination brought on by the pain of rejection. Things like this did not happen to girls like her, orphaned, penniless, cast-off girls who had spent their whole lives being told they were not enough. Your Majesty, Demon tried again, desperation creeping into his tone. Surely we can discuss this. The rejection ceremony is sacred. The bond between us is already broken. Kyle's voice held no emotion. You broke it yourself. Whatever claim you had on her ended the moment those words left your mouth. He turned back to the crowd, and his next words rang through the hall with absolute authority. Let it be known that Alara Vane is under the protection of the crown. Any who harm her, insult her, or question her worth will answer to me personally. He began walking toward the door, and Alara had no choice but to follow. Her hand was still tucked against his arm, her feet moving automatically even as her mind reeled. She caught glimpses of faces as they passed: shock, envy, calculation, and Demon, standing frozen where they had left him, his expression twisted with something that looked almost like regret. The night air hit her face as they stepped outside, cool and sharp after the suffocating heat of the ballroom. A black carriage waited at the bottom of the steps, drawn by 4 massive horses that stamped and snorted in the torchlight. "Where are you taking me?" Alara finally found her voice. Cale Blackwood looked down at her, and for just a moment his harsh expression softened into something almost gentle. "Home," he said. "I am taking you home." The carriage door opened, and Alara stepped into her new life. The carriage interior was larger than the room Alara had slept in for the past 3 years. Dark leather seats faced each other across a space wide enough to stretch her legs, and velvet curtains framed windows that looked out onto the passing night. Lanterns hung in the corners, casting warm light across polished wood and silver fixtures. It smelled of leather and pine and something else, something wild and masculine that she was beginning to associate with the man sitting across from her. Kyle Blackwood had not spoken since they left the ballroom. He sat with his arms crossed over his broad chest, his golden eyes fixed on the window as if the darkness beyond held something fascinating. The silence between them grew heavier with each passing moment, filled with all the questions Alara was too afraid to ask. She studied him in the lamplight, trying to reconcile what she knew of the Alpha King with the man before her. The stories painted him as a ruthless warrior who had united the fractured wolf territories through blood and conquest. They said he had killed his own father to take the throne. They said he had never taken a mate because no woman could survive the weight of his power. They said a lot of things, and Alara had believed most of them until tonight. But the man who had helped her off that ballroom floor, who had tucked her hand against his arm like she was something precious, he did not seem like a monster. Cold, yes. Intimidating, certainly. But there had been a gentleness in his touch that contradicted everything she had heard. "You are staring." His voice broke the silence, though he did not turn from the window. Heat flooded Alara's cheeks. "I apologize, Your Majesty. I did not mean to—" "Kyle." Now he did look at her, and the weight of his attention made her breath catch. "When we are alone, you will call me Kyle. I have enough people bowing and scraping. I do not need it from my mate. My mate." The words sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Alara folded her hands in her lap, trying to find her composure. She had spent 3 years learning to make herself small and unobtrusive in Demon's household. Old habits were hard to break. "I do not understand," she admitted quietly. "The mate bond. I felt it when you walked in, but I was already bonded to Demon. How is it possible to have 2 mates?" Kale's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "You were never truly bonded to him. A real mate bond cannot be rejected so easily. What you felt with him was an echo, a shadow of what the bond should be." He paused, and something dark passed through his eyes. "He was never meant to be yours, Alara. I was." The certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it loosened something tight in her chest, a knot of anxiety she had carried for so long that she had forgotten it was there. The bond between her and Demon had always felt fragile, conditional, like something that could be snatched away at any moment. And it had been. But this new bond, the one that hummed between her and Kyle like a plucked string, felt different, solid, inevitable, as if it had always existed, simply waiting for them to find each other. The things demons said about me, she forced herself to continue, needing him to know the truth before this went any further. They were not lies. I cannot bear children. The healers confirmed it years ago. If you are looking for an heir, I am looking for nothing. Kyle leaned forward, and suddenly he was close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his golden eyes. I did not choose you, Alara. The bond chose you, and I have learned not to question fate. His voice dropped lower, rougher. As for heirs, I have ruled alone for 12 years. I have survived assassination attempts, wars, and betrayals. The last thing I need is a child to use as leverage against me. Alara blinked. She had expected disappointment, or perhaps a cold calculation about political alternatives. She had not expected this, blunt honesty delivered without a trace of resentment. You are not angry? She asked. Why would I be angry about something neither of us can control? He settled back against his seat, but his eyes remained on her face. You have spent too long with wolves who saw you as a means to an end. I am not Demon Cross. I do not need you to be anything other than what you are. The words hit her harder than any rejection could have. Alara felt tears prick at her eyes again, but these were different. Hot and overwhelming and born from something other than pain. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever suggested that she, exactly as she was, might be enough. I do not know how to be a queen, she whispered. Kale's expression softened by the smallest degree. Then we will figure it out together. But tonight, you need rest. We have a long journey ahead, and you have been through enough. As if on cue, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The adrenaline that had carried her through the rejection, the claiming, the escape, all of it drained away, leaving her hollow and heavy. Her eyelids drooped despite her best efforts to stay alert. Sleep, Kyle said, and it was not a suggestion. I will keep watch. Alara wanted to argue. She barely knew this man, this king who had upended her entire existence in the span of an hour. But her body betrayed her, slumping against the leather seat as darkness crept into the edges of her vision. The last thing she felt before sleep claimed her was a warm weight settling over her shoulders, a coat that smelled of pine and winter storms. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt safe. Alara woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the distant sound of birdsong. She lay still for a long moment, her mind struggling to catch up with her surroundings. The bed beneath her was impossibly soft, the sheets smooth and cool against her skin. A canopy of dark blue velvet hung above her, embroidered with silver threads that caught the morning light. This was not the cramped servants' quarters she had grown accustomed to in Demon's household. This was something else entirely. Memory returned in fragments, the rejection, the ballroom, the Alpha King claiming her before hundreds of witnesses. The carriage ride through the darkness, his coat wrapped around her shoulders. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding, and found herself alone in a room larger than any she had ever occupied. Tall windows overlooked a sprawling garden, and beyond that she could see the spires of a castle rising against a pale morning sky. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she managed, pulling the covers up to her chest despite being fully clothed in yesterday's rumpled gown. The door opened to reveal a plump, gray-haired woman carrying a tray laden with food. She had warm brown eyes and the kind of face that seemed built for smiling, though her expression now was carefully neutral. "Good morning, my lady. I am Marin, head of the household staff. His Majesty asked me to see to your needs." My lady. The title felt wrong, like wearing shoes that did not fit. Alara opened her mouth to correct the woman, to explain that she was no lady, just an orphaned Omega who had somehow stumbled into a situation far beyond her understanding. But Marin was already bustling about the room, setting the tray on a small table by the window and pulling back the remaining curtains. "You slept through the night and most of the morning," Marin continued briskly. "His Majesty carried you in himself, wouldn't let anyone else touch you." There was a note of surprise in her voice, as if this behavior was unusual. "He's asked that you rest today. A seamstress will come this afternoon to take your measurements for new clothes. In the meantime, I've brought breakfast and drawn a bath." Alara's stomach growled at the mention of food, loudly enough that Marin's neutral expression finally cracked into a small smile. "Eat first," the older woman suggested. "The bath will keep." The breakfast was simple but plentiful: fresh bread, butter, sliced fruit, and a pot of tea that smelled of honey and chamomile. Alara ate slowly at first, half expecting someone to snatch the food away, then with increasing appetite as she realized no one was coming. In Demon's household, she had eaten whatever scraps were left after the family finished. She had forgotten what it felt like to have a meal that was meant just for her. After she had eaten her fill, Marin led her to an adjoining room where a copper tub waited, steam rising from the water. Bottles of oil and soap lined a nearby shelf, and thick towels hung from a warming rack. Alara bathed in a daze, washing away the grime and tears of the previous night until her skin was pink and tingling. She was drying her hair by the fire when the door to her chamber opened without warning. Cale Blackwood stood in the doorway, dressed in simple dark clothes that did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. He looked different in the daylight, still imposing, still sharp-edged, but there were shadows under his golden eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. His gaze swept over her, wrapped in a borrowed robe with her damp hair hanging loose, and something flickered in his expression. Something almost vulnerable. "You are awake," he said, as if he had not been certain she would be. "I am." Alara rose to her feet, clutching the robe tighter. "Thank you for the room, and the food, and—" She trailed off, unsure how to express gratitude for having her entire life upended. Cale stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I need to tell you something, before rumors reach you first." He moved to the window, his back to her, tension visible in the rigid line of his shoulders. "The stories you have heard about me, many of them are true. I have done terrible things to claim and keep this throne. But there is one story that is a lie, and you deserve to know the truth." Alara waited, barely breathing. "They say I killed my father." Kyle's voice was flat, controlled. "I did not. My father was murdered by his own beta, a man named Vorath who sought to seize power during the chaos. I was 17 years old, and I watched it happen. I could not stop it." His hands clenched at his sides. "I killed Vorath afterward, tore out his throat with my bare hands, and when I emerged covered in blood, the court assumed the worst. I let them believe it." "Why?" The question slipped out before Alara could stop it. Cale turned to face her, and the rawness in his eyes stole her breath. "Because a king who would kill his own father is feared. A boy who failed to save his father is pitied. Fear keeps me alive. Pity would have gotten me killed." He paused, searching her face for something. "You are the first person I have told, the first person I have trusted with the truth." The weight of that confession settled over Alara like a second coat. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, what it meant to carry a secret that shaped how the world saw you, to be defined by something that was not entirely true. "Your secret is safe with me," she said softly. "I swear it." Something shifted in Cale's expression, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. For just a moment, he looked less like a king and more like a man who had been alone for far too long. "I believe you," he said, and the way he said it made her think he had not believed anyone in a very long time. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of new experiences. Alara was fitted for gowns she never could have imagined wearing, fed meals that would have lasted her a week in her old life, and given free rein to explore the castle grounds. No one ordered her about. No one looked at her with contempt. The servants treated her with cautious respect, and Marin fussed over her like a mother hen who had found a lost chick. but it was the evenings she found herself looking forward to most. Each night, Kyle would come to her chambers after his duties were finished. Sometimes he brought documents to review, spreading them across her table while she sat nearby with a book. Sometimes he simply sat in the chair by the fire, watching the flames while the silence stretched between them. He rarely spoke of anything personal, but his presence had become a comfort she had not expected. The mate bond hummed quietly in her chest whenever he was near, a steady warmth that grew stronger with each passing day. On the fifth night, he arrived later than usual. Alara had nearly given up waiting, curled in the window seat with a borrowed novel she was not really reading. When the door opened, she looked up to find him standing in the entrance, his expression troubled in a way she had not seen before. "What happened?" she asked, setting the book aside. Kyle crossed the room and dropped into his usual chair, running a hand through his dark hair. "Council matters. Nothing that concerns you." But his voice was tight, and the shadows under his eyes had deepened since that first morning. Alara hesitated. The old version of herself would have accepted his dismissal and retreated into silence. But something had shifted between them over these past days, something fragile and new that made her brave enough to push. "You have not slept properly since I arrived," she said quietly. "I can see it. Whatever is troubling you, perhaps it would help to speak of it." Kyle looked at her for a long moment, his golden eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, the tension in his shoulders eased. "There is a faction on my council that believes I should reject you, send you back to cross territory and find a more suitable match." His jaw tightened. "They have been vocal about it." The words landed like a blow to her chest. Alara had known, on some level, that her presence here was controversial. An orphaned Omega with no family, no fortune, no ability to bear heirs. She was hardly the queen the kingdom expected. But hearing it spoken aloud made the fantasy of these past few days feel suddenly fragile. "Perhaps they are right," she heard herself say. "I am not what anyone would choose for a king. If my presence causes you political difficulty—" "Stop." Kyle's voice was sharp, and he was on his feet before she could finish the sentence. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, and suddenly he was standing before her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Do you think I care about political difficulty? Do you think I have survived this long by bending to the will of cowards and schemers?" Elara's heart was racing now, pounding against her ribs like a caged bird. "I think you are a king who must consider the good of his kingdom. And you are my mate." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "The bond does not lie, Alara. It does not make mistakes. You are meant to be here, by my side. I knew it the moment I walked into that ballroom and saw you on your knees." He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing against her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that had killed. Alara's breath caught in her throat. The bond between them flared bright and hot, and she felt it echoed in his touch. The same longing, the same need, the same terrifying hope. "I am not good with words," Kale continued, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I have spent too many years alone, trusting no one, caring for nothing but survival. But when I look at you, I feel something I cannot explain, something I do not want to fight anymore." Ilara's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "Kyle—" He kissed her before she could finish. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hungry and desperate, the kind of kiss that spoke of years of loneliness and longing finally breaking free. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head back as his mouth claimed hers with an intensity that stole her breath and her thoughts and every fear she had been carrying. Ilara gasped against his lips, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer even as some part of her whispered that this was too fast, too much, too impossible. But the bond sang in her veins, and her wolf howled with joy. And for the first time in her life, Ilara stopped thinking and simply felt. When they finally broke apart, Both breathing hard, Kyle pressed his forehead against hers. His eyes were molten gold, burning with an emotion that made her knees weak. "I will not send you away," he said, his voice rough. "Not now. Not ever. Let them scheme and plot. Let them whisper their objections. I have faced worse than disapproving counselors." His lips curved into something that was almost a smile. "And I have never lost a battle I chose to fight." Alara laughed, surprising herself with the sound. It was shaky and tearful, but it was real. The first genuine laugh she could remember in years. "You are very arrogant, Your Majesty." "Kyle," he corrected, and kissed her again. Outside the window, the moon rose high and bright over the castle spires, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled into the night. The woman arrived 3 days after the kiss. Alara was in the garden, enjoying the late afternoon sun, when she heard the commotion at the front gates. Carriages were common enough at the castle, but this one was different, gilded in silver and pulled by white horses, with a crest on the door that she did not recognize. Servants rushed to attend it, their movements quick and nervous in a way that set her instincts on edge. She made her way back inside, following the sounds of activity to the main entrance hall. A small crowd had gathered there, courtiers and staff alike, all of them focused on the figure standing at the center of the marble floor. It was a woman, tall and willowy, with hair the color of spun gold, and a face so beautiful it almost hurt to look at. She was dressed in a traveling gown of deep crimson that hugged her curves in ways Alara's own modest dress could never manage. And she was embracing Kale. Alara froze at the edge of the crowd, her heart plummeting into her stomach. Kyle's arms were stiff at his sides, his expression unreadable, but the woman seemed not to notice or care. She clung to him like they were long-lost lovers reunited after years apart, her red lips curved into a smile that made something ugly twist in Alara's chest. "Kyle, darling," the woman purred, finally pulling back to look up at him. "It has been far too long. When I heard the news, I simply had to come see for myself." "Lady Seraphina." Kyle's voice was cold, formal. "I was not expecting you." "Of course you were not. I wanted to surprise you." Seraphina's green eyes flickered to the crowd, scanning faces until they landed on Alara. Something sharp and predatory gleamed in her gaze. And this must be her, the little Omega everyone is talking about. The crowd parted as Seraphina glided toward Alara, her movements graceful as a dancer's. Up close, she was even more striking. Flawless skin, high cheekbones, the kind of beauty that made other women feel plain by comparison. She looked Alara up and down with an expression of polite curiosity that did not quite hide the contempt beneath. "How charming," Seraphina said softly. "I can see why you caught his attention. There is something almost sweet about you, in a common sort of way." Alara's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to stand straight. "I do not believe we have been introduced, my lady." "Oh, how rude of me." Seraphina's smile widened. "I am Lady Seraphina Voss, daughter of the Eastern Alpha. Kyle and I were betrothed once before his father died, and everything became so complicated." She reached out and patted Alara's cheek like she was a child. "But do not worry, little one. I am not here to steal him back. I merely want to ensure that the kingdom is in capable hands." Before Alara could respond, Kale was there, stepping between them with a growl that rumbled through the hall. "That is enough, Seraphina. You will treat my mate with respect, or you will leave." Seraphina's eyes widened in mock innocence. "I meant no offense, Your Majesty. I was simply welcoming her to court." She dipped into a graceful curtsy. "Forgive me if my manners were lacking. It has been a long journey." The tension in the hall was thick enough to choke on. Alara watched Kale's face, searching for some reassurance, but his expression had gone cold and distant in a way she had not seen since that first night in the carriage. He looked like a king again, not the man who had kissed her breathless by the fire. Marin will show you to your rooms, Kyle said flatly. We will speak later. Serafina smiled as if she had won something. Of course, darling. We have so much to catch up on. She swept past Alara without another glance, her crimson skirts trailing behind her like a river of blood. The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving Alara standing alone in the entrance hall with a heart full of doubts she could not name. Betrothed. The word echoed in her mind like a curse. Kyle had been betrothed to that woman, that beautiful, high-born, obviously fertile woman who looked at him like he belonged to her. She did not realize Kyle had approached until his hand closed around hers. Alara. His voice was low, urgent. Whatever she said, whatever she implied, it means nothing. The betrothal was arranged by our fathers when we were children. It ended the night my father died. She does not seem to think it ended. Alara hated the tremor in her voice, the insecurity that leaked through despite her best efforts. Kale's grip tightened. She thinks what she wants to think. It does not change the truth. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. You are my mate, the only one I want. Do you understand? Alara nodded, but the doubt had already taken root. Serafina was everything she was not. Powerful, beautiful, politically valuable. The council would surely prefer her as queen. The kingdom would surely prefer her as queen. And somewhere in the castle, that perfect, predatory woman was settling into her rooms, waiting for her chance to prove it. That night, Alara lay awake long after the candles had burned low. The mate bond pulsed steadily in her chest, warm and reassuring, but it was not enough to silence the voice in her head that whispered she did not belong here, that she never would. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. 3 days after Serafina's arrival, a servant came to Alara's chambers with a message. The Alpha King requested her presence in the East Wing study immediately. Alara went without question, her heart lifting at the prospect of time alone with Kyle. He had been distant since Serafina's arrival, pulled into meetings and councils that stretched from dawn until well past dark. She missed him with an ache that surprised her. The East Wing was quiet when she arrived, the corridors empty of servants and guards. Alara found the study door slightly ajar and pushed it open, already forming Kale's name on her lips. The word died in her throat. Kale stood by the window, his back to the door, and Serafina was pressed against him, her arms wound around his neck, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered something too soft for Alara to hear. They looked like lovers, sharing a secret, intimate, and familiar in a way that shattered something deep in Alara's chest. A sound escaped her, some broken animal noise she did not recognize as her own voice. Kale spun around, his eyes widening when he saw her in the doorway. Serafina turned more slowly, and the smile on her perfect face was one of pure triumph. Alara. Kyle stepped away from Serafina, his expression shifting to something desperate. This is not what it looks like. Do not! Alara's voice came out stronger than she felt, steady despite the tears blurring her vision. Do not lie to me. I am not lying. She engineered this. She sent for you, not me. I came because I received the same message. How convenient. Serafina's voice was silk and poison. Blame the scorned woman when you are caught. How very noble of you, Kale. Alara could not breathe. The mate bond was screaming at her to stay, to listen, to believe him. But her eyes had seen what they had seen. Serafina draped over him like she belonged there. His hands that had not pushed her away quickly enough. The whispered words that Alara would never know. She had been a fool. A desperate, lonely fool who had believed that someone like her could matter to someone like him. I need to go, she heard herself say. Alara, wait. Kyle started toward her, but she was already backing away, her hand raised to stop him. Do not follow me. Please. Her voice cracked on the last word. I cannot. I need time. I need to think. She fled before he could argue, before he could touch her and make her forget why she was running. The corridors blurred past her, servants and guards nothing more than shadows as she ran toward her chambers. But when she reached them, she did not stop. She grabbed her cloak, the only thing she truly owned, and kept going, down the back stairs, through the kitchen, out into the fading light of evening. The castle gates loomed ahead, and beyond them, the forest that bordered the royal grounds. Ilara did not know where she was going. She only knew that she could not stay here, could not share a roof with the woman who had taken everything from her. Again, just like before. She was halfway across the courtyard when a hand grabbed her arm. Running away, little Omega! Ilara spun to find Seraphina standing behind her, the mask of sweetness finally gone. In its place was something cold and satisfied, like a cat that had cornered its prey. Let go of me, Ilara demanded. I do not think I will. Seraphina's grip tightened painfully. You see, you have caused me a great deal of trouble. That crown was supposed to be mine. That king was supposed to be mine. And then you stumbled into that ballroom and ruined everything with your pathetic little bond. The bond is real. You cannot fake. I know it is real. Seraphina's eyes glittered with malice. That is why you have to disappear. Not die, I am not a monster, but vanish. Go somewhere far away where Kale will never find you. Let him believe you abandoned him, that the bond was not strong enough to keep you. Ilara's blood ran cold. You planned all of this, the scene in the study, the message. Obviously, Seraphina smiled. And you played your part beautifully. Kyle saw the doubt in your eyes. He knows you do not trust him. By the time he realizes you are gone, he will think you left by choice. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And eventually, he will stop looking. They always do. Before Ilara could scream, before she could fight, something sharp pierced her neck. The world tilted sideways, her limbs going heavy and numb. She caught a glimpse of a hooded figure behind her, a syringe glinting in the fading light. Seraphina's face swam above her, beautiful and terrible. Sweet dreams, little Omega. When you wake, you will be very far from here. Darkness swallowed her whole, and in the castle behind her, Cale Blackwood tore apart his study, searching for the mate who had vanished like smoke, never knowing that she had not left him at all. Ilara woke to darkness and the smell of damp stone. Her head throbbed with a pain that radiated from the base of her skull, and her mouth was dry as sand. She tried to move and found her wrists bound behind her back, rough rope cutting into her skin. Slowly, her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through a crack in the wall, revealing a small, windowless room that looked like it had once been a cellar. Barrels lined one wall. A single wooden door stood opposite her, bolted from the outside. She had no idea how long she had been unconscious. Hours, certainly. Perhaps a full day. The drug they had used still lingered in her system, making her thoughts slow and fuzzy. But one thing cut through the haze with perfect clarity. Kale thought she had left him. The realization hurt worse than the ropes or the headache or the cold stone beneath her. He would be searching for her now. She was certain of that much. But Seraphina had planned this perfectly. There would be no signs of struggle, no witnesses, nothing to suggest Ilara had been taken against her will. Just a heartbroken Omega who had fled into the night after seeing her mate with another woman. He would think she had abandoned him, just like everyone else in his life had done. Tears slipped down her cheeks, hot and useless. She had promised to keep his secrets, promised that she would stay. And now, through no fault of her own, she had become another betrayal in a lifetime full of them. The bolt on the door scraped open. Ilara tensed as a figure stepped into the room, but it was not Seraphina. It was a man she did not recognize. Broad-shouldered, rough-faced, with the look of a hired mercenary rather than a noble. He carried a tray with a cup of water and a heel of bread, which he set on the floor just inside her reach. Eat, he grunted. Lady's orders. She wants you alive. Where am I? Alara's voice came out hoarse and cracked. The man shrugged. Does it matter? You will be on a ship by tomorrow night, headed somewhere the Alpha King will never find you. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Word of advice, Omega. Stop fighting. Accept your fate. It will be easier that way. The door slammed shut behind him, and Alara was alone again. She did not eat. She did not drink. Instead, she closed her eyes and reached for the one thing Seraphina could not take from her, the mate bond. It was still there, pulsing faintly in her chest like a second heartbeat, weaker than before, stretched thin by distance but unbroken. Alara focused on it with everything she had, pouring her fear and her love and her desperate hope into that golden thread. She did not know if Kale could feel it. She did not know if the bond worked that way. But it was all she had left. Please, she thought. Please find me. I did not leave you. I would never leave you. Miles away, in the wreckage of his study, Cale Blackwood went still. The bond. He could feel something through the bond, faint and distant, but unmistakably Alara. Not the cold silence of rejection, not the gradual fading of a mate who had chosen to walk away. This was something else. Fear, desperation, a plea that resonated in his very bones. She had not left him. She had been taken. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and the rage that followed was unlike anything he had ever felt. His wolf surged to the surface, howling for blood, for vengeance, for the throat of whoever had dared to touch what was his. He threw back his head and roared, the sound shaking the walls and bringing guards running from every direction. Your Majesty? The captain of the guard burst through the door, sword drawn. What has happened? Seraphina. Kyle's voice was barely human, more growl than words. Find her, now. But when the guards searched Seraphina's chambers, they found them empty. The lady had vanished hours ago, along with a small retinue of servants and guards who had apparently been in her employ all along. A search of the grounds revealed tracks leading to the eastern road, toward the coast, toward the ports, toward ships that could carry a prisoner far beyond the reach of the Alpha King. Cale shifted before he reached the gates. His wolf form was massive, black as midnight, with eyes that burned like molten gold. He moved through the darkness like a shadow, faster than any horse, driven by a fury that would not rest until he held his mate in his arms again. The bond pulled him forward, a compass pointing true north, growing stronger with every mile he covered. Hold on, he thought, pushing the words through the bond with all the force he could muster. I am coming for you. I will always come for you. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, locked in a cellar and waiting for dawn, Alara felt his answer wash over her like sunlight. She smiled through her tears and began working at the ropes around her wrists. The ropes were stubborn, but Alara was more stubborn still. She worked at them through the night, twisting and pulling until her wrists were raw and bleeding. The pain barely registered. All that mattered was the bond humming in her chest, growing stronger with each passing hour, telling her that Cale was coming, that she was not alone, that she had never been alone, not since the moment he walked into that ballroom and changed everything. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through the crack in the wall, she had loosened the knots enough to slip one hand free. The rest came quickly after that. She stood on shaking legs, pressing her ear to the door, listening for movement beyond. Voices drifted from somewhere above, agitated, hurried. Something had them worried. Good. The bolt on the door was old, the wood around it soft with rot. Alara threw her shoulder against it once, twice, 3 times before it gave way with a splintering crack. She stumbled into a narrow corridor lit by guttering torches, her heart pounding as she searched for a way out. She found the stairs just as the screaming started. It came from above, men shouting, the clash of steel, and beneath it all, a sound that made her blood sing with recognition. A wolf's howl, deep and furious and close, so close. Alara ran toward it. She burst through a door at the top of the stairs and found herself in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, crates and barrels stacked high against the walls. Morning light streamed through broken windows, illuminating a scene of chaos. Guards lay scattered across the floor, some groaning, some still. And at the center of it all stood a massive black wolf, his muzzle stained with blood, his golden eyes fixed on the woman cowering against the far wall. Seraphina. The wolf's head swung toward Alara the moment she appeared, and the rage in those golden eyes shifted to something else entirely. Relief, desperation, love. He shifted between one heartbeat and the next, the wolf melting away to reveal Kale in torn clothes, his chest heaving, his face streaked with dirt and blood that was not his own. Ilara. Her name left his lips like a prayer. She crossed the distance between them without thinking, throwing herself into his arms with a force that nearly knocked them both to the ground. He caught her, his arms wrapping around her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she did not care. She buried her face in his chest and sobbed, ugly, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. "I did not leave you," she gasped. "I would never—" She made it look like, "I thought you would think—" "I know." His voice was rough, broken. "I felt you through the bond. I felt everything." He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I should have killed her the moment she arrived. I should have trusted my instincts. I am so sorry, Alara. I am so sorry I let her hurt you." "It was not your fault." She gripped his wrists, holding him there. "None of this was your fault." A bitter laugh came from behind them. They turned to find Seraphina on her feet, her perfect hair in disarray, her crimson dress torn and dirty. But even now, even defeated, she looked at them with contempt. "How touching," she spat. "The monster king and his barren little mate. You deserve each other." Kale moved toward her, murder in his eyes, but Alara caught his arm. "No." Her voice was steady now, stronger than she had ever heard it. "She is not worth it. Let the courts deal with her. Let everyone see what she truly is." For a long moment, Kale stood rigid, every muscle coiled with the need for violence. Then, slowly, he exhaled. He turned his back on Seraphina and returned to Alara, taking her hands in his. "You are right," he said quietly. "She has taken enough from us. I will not let her take my honor as well." Guards arrived within the hour, royal soldiers who had followed their king's trail through the night. They took Seraphina into custody, her protests and threats falling on deaf ears. Alara watched her being led away and felt nothing but exhaustion. It was over. It was finally over. Kyle did not let go of her hand through any of it. When they were finally alone, standing in the ruins of the warehouse with sunlight warming their faces, he dropped to his knees before her. Alara's breath caught as he looked up at her with those golden eyes, all his walls down, all his armor stripped away. "I love you," he said, the words raw and honest. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you on that ballroom floor, broken but undefeated. I have loved you through every moment since." He reached into his coat and withdrew a simple ring, a band of silver set with a single moonstone that glowed like captured starlight. "I am not good at this. I do not know how to be soft or gentle or any of the things you deserve. But I will spend the rest of my life trying, if you will let me." His voice shook. "Alara Vane, will you be my queen, my mate, my everything?" Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling, really smiling, the way she had not smiled since she was a child with parents who loved her and a future full of promise. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, yes." Kale surged to his feet and kissed her. and the mate bond sang between them like a choir of wolves howling at the moon. 6 months later, the great hall was filled with wolves once more. But this time, Elara was not kneeling on the cold marble floor. She stood at the altar in a gown of ivory silk, her hair crowned with white winter roses, her hand clasped firmly in Kael's. The same nobles who had watched her humiliation now watched her triumph, their faces a mixture of awe and grudging respect. She did not care what they thought. She had stopped caring about the opinions of strangers the night Kael had carried her out of that ballroom and into a new life. I, Kael Blackwood, claim you, Elara Vane, as my mate and queen, Kael said, his voice ringing through the hall. From this day until my last day, in this life and whatever comes after. The words wrapped around her like a promise, sealing the bond that already burned bright between them. Elara smiled up at him, her heart so full it ached. I, Elara Blackwood, claim you as my mate and king, she answered, from this day until my last day, in this life and whatever comes after. Kael kissed her before the officiant could finish speaking, and the hall erupted in cheers. Somewhere in the crowd, Marin was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The council members who had once demanded Elara's removal now applauded alongside everyone else, their objections long since silenced by a king who had made it very clear that his mate was not up for debate. As for Seraphina, she was rotting in a prison cell in the Eastern Territories, stripped of her title and her family's support. Her father had personally delivered her to Kael's justice, eager to distance himself from his daughter's disgrace. Elara had not asked what would become of her. Some chapters were better left closed. The celebration lasted well into the night, but eventually Elara and Kael slipped away from the noise and the crowds. They walked through the castle gardens hand in hand, the same gardens where Elara had first heard Seraphina's carriage arrive, the same paths she had wandered during those early uncertain days. Everything looked different now. Everything felt different. I have something to tell you, Elara said softly, stopping beneath an ancient oak tree silvered by moonlight. Kael turned to her, a flicker of concern crossing his features. What is it? She took his hand and pressed it gently against her stomach. For a moment, he simply stared at her, confusion giving way to disbelief giving way to something raw and wondering. The healers confirmed it this morning, she whispered. They cannot explain it. They said it should not be possible, but the bond... Her voice wavered with emotion. They think the bond healed whatever was broken in me. Kael, I am carrying your child. The Alpha King, the most feared wolf in the kingdom, dropped to his knees for the second time in his life. He pressed his forehead against her stomach, his broad shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Elara threaded her fingers through his dark hair and held him close, tears streaming down her own face. You have given me everything, he said hoarsely. A mate, a family, a reason to be more than just a king. He looked up at her with golden eyes full of light. I do not deserve you. Elara cupped his face in her hands, the same way he had done for her so many times before. You deserve to be loved, Kael. You always did. You just needed someone to see it. He rose and kissed her beneath the oak tree, beneath the stars, beneath a future that stretched out before them full of promise and hope. In the distance, wolves began to howl, a chorus of celebration rising from the forest, from the castle, from every corner of the kingdom. The sound carried through the night like a blessing, like a prophecy fulfilled. The Baron Omega had become a queen, and they lived as all true mates do, happily ever after.